I did not grow up in a household with guns in it, but guns were not a foreign thing to me. As a Boy Scout, I went skeet shooting and actually turned out to be pretty good at it. My Oklahoma grandfather, who had some land and some cattle, had a locked oak case full of long guns in the living room of his home, which I would see whenever I went to visit. So I grew up with some guns in my life. When I thought back about where this, what I would call a lifelong dedication to this issue began for me, I actually thought back to my first trip to Los Angeles of my life. This was in the summer of 1984, and I came here for my uncle's wedding. So that was the Los Angeles Olympic Games, but also that summer on July 18th at McDonald's in a town called San Ysidro, which is in between San Diego and Los Angeles, there was a mass shooting where 20 people were killed and as many injured by a gunman who simply sat there and reloaded as people hid under the tables. And as a 11-year-old boy, it was shocking to me and gave me nightmares. As a father myself, I have two children, currently 13 and 8. And when the Newtown shooting happened with 6 and 7-year-olds, they were both right around the age of the children who were killed there. And once again, it was this combination of sort of heartbreak and shock and a kind of a disbelief that nothing happened. There's a passage in Isaiah 22 in which Isaiah tells Hezekiah that he has not done the right things in preparing the city of Jerusalem for an oncoming siege by the Neo-Assyrians. It says that you have torn down houses to build this wall, but you have not looked to the one who created the city. And it's a somewhat mysterious passage, arguably from a historical standpoint, because what Hezekiah did is actually profoundly practical, and the city of Jerusalem withstood that siege. And it winds up being, for the book of Isaiah, for the Old Testament, a rather central event, often portrayed as divine salvation. So what is Isaiah's problem with what Hezekiah has done? So my argument is that in saying that Hezekiah hasn't looked to God, looked to the one who created the city, that he is impugning, it's part of his wider social justice concern. The leaders embodied in the king of Judah at the time are not thinking about the wider culture. They're not thinking about all of the people who are harmed in their massing of wealth and power in a centralized way. This fits into that sort of wider polemic against injustice that we see in the book of Isaiah. In the background of the paper is the presupposition that anything about nonviolence or disarmament must be from the New Testament. That's what Jesus does, right? Jesus gives his life over, suffers and dies on the cross at the hands of a violent state. But the Old Testament, that's where you fight for your tribe, right? That's where you fight for national pride. And I think that's a misunderstanding, because as we read the Old Testament canon, as it finally stands, I think that's not the ethic that's actually dominant. There certainly are these stories and strata and periods where this warlike or war oracles are central points of focus. But in the final canon, there is this same focus that you see in Isaiah, which is look to God. Your salvation is in God and not in your own human preparations. We can think of lots of examples, not just from Isaiah, who's constantly advising them not to make human pacts with foreign countries for their safety, but rather look to God. Jeremiah says, submit to Babylon. Deuteronomy says, don't go down to Egypt for horses. So time and time again, you get this sort of focus on impractical disarmament. Isaiah 6 says that no one listened to Isaiah. Jeremiah gets called a traitor and tossed in a cistern as a traitor. Right? No one wants to be told, do the impractical thing, disarm, yet that's actually the word that you get time and time again in these prophets. And why are these unpopular prophecies then saved? Why are they canonized? Because they were proved right in the wider scope of history. So hopefully it's clear how this might apply to our situation now with guns. We have a whole culture in which people think, I need a gun so that I can be safe. That's the number one reason why that people give for wanting to own a gun, especially women, right? Self-defense. And that's the same thing that the prophets then have to preach against. And so it's the same call to a concern for the wider culture, not just thinking about oneself and one's short-term survival, but rather what kind of lives are we called to live in the world as peacemakers.